The world is not born equal. It was a truth Izuku Midoriya learned at the tender age of 4, but unlike the tragic tales of the quirkless, Izuku learned this truth not by looking up from the dirt, but by looking down at his own hands, which glowed with the brilliance of a newborn star. His mother Inko could pull small objects toward her. His father, Hisashi, could breathe a modest plume of fire, barely enough to light a cigarette. Genetically speaking, Izuku should have inherited a combination of the two, perhaps the ability to pull fire toward him, or breathe a slightly hotter flame. Genetics, however, is a game of roulette. Sometimes, the chamber holds a blank. Other times, it holds a tactical nuke. When Izuku's quirk manifested, he didn't just breathe fire. He became it. Dr. Tsubasa had stared at the heat-resistant readouts on his monitor, wiping sweat from his brow despite the air conditioning being cranked to the maximum. 4-year-old Izuku sat on the examination table, a halo of pure, white gold plasma dancing harmlessly across his freckled cheeks and small shoulders. It's a 1 in a billion mutation, Mrs. Midoriya, the doctor had explained, his voice trembling slightly. His father generates fire. Your quirk relies on microgravitational pulls. Izuku's body has combined these traits in an unfathomable way. He doesn't just generate heat. He pulls ambient thermal and kinetic energy from his surroundings, condenses it within his cells, and expels it as pure, superheated plasma. Inko had looked worried. Is it dangerous? Will he burn himself? That's the miraculous part, Dr. Tsubasa said, leaning forward. There is a famous hero, Endeavor. His Hellflame is devastating, but it relies on his body's internal stamina. If he uses it too much, his core temperature rises to lethal levels. He burns up from the inside. But Izuku is an endothermic reactor. His flames don't raise his core temperature, they regulate it. The more heat he produces or absorbs, the cooler his internal organs stay. He is entirely immune to heat, and practically immune to overheating. Objectively speaking, Mrs. Midoriya, your son possesses the most perfect fire quirk I have ever seen. They registered the quirk under the name Sunfire. 10 years later, Izuku Midoriya stood in the courtyard of Aldera Junior High, writing furiously in his notebook. He was still the same muttering, analytical boy who adored All Might, but there was a quiet confidence in his posture that commanded a wide berth from the other students. Hey, Deku! Izuku didn't flinch as Katsuki Bakugo stomped toward him, palms crackling with miniature explosions. Bakugo's face was twisted in its perpetual scowl, driven by a deep, festering inferiority complex that had begun the day Izuku's white flames had accidentally melted a steel playground slide into slag. Kaken, Izuku greeted mildly, closing his notebook. Did you need something? Don't give me that calm crap. Bakugo snarled, slamming a smoking hand onto Izuku's desk. You think you're better than me just because you run a little hot? I'm going to UA. I'm going to be the undisputed #1. Don't even think about applying, Izuku sighed. He didn't hate Bakugo, but the blonde's aggressive posturing had grown tiresome over the years. Kaken, we've talked about this. UA isn't a monopoly. We can both go. I have to be the only one from this trash school. Bakugo roared, swinging a right hook enhanced by a point-blank explosion. Izuku didn't blink. He raised a hand. Boom. The explosion engulfed Izuku's upper body. The other students gasped, backing away. But as the smoke cleared, Izuku remained completely unharmed. The explosive heat hadn't burned him. It had simply vanished. In its place, Izuku's right hand was bathed in a brilliant, blinding white gold flame. Your explosions are combustion, Kaken, Izuku said softly, the white light reflecting in his emerald eyes. Combustion is just rapid heat and gas expansion. My quirk naturally absorbs the thermal-kinetic energy of your blasts to fuel my own. You're not fighting me. You're just feeding me. To prove his point, Izuku flicked his wrist. A tiny, compressed sphere of white fire shot upward, bursting through the clouds above the school with a concussive shockwave that rattled the windows. Bakugo grit his teeth, his hands shaking with impotent rage, before turning and storming off. Later that afternoon, the sludge villain incident occurred. But unlike a timeline where a quirkless boy rushed in to save his bully, this timeline saw a very different resolution. When the sludge villain grabbed Bakugo, the local heroes were paralyzed by the hostage situation and the spreading fires. Izuku didn't hesitate. He stepped past Death Arms and Kamui Woods. Kid, get back! Death Arms yelled. Izuku ignored him. He stepped into the raging alleyway fires that Bakugo's panicked explosions had caused. The moment Izuku's sneakers touched the flames, the normal orange fire surged toward him, spiraling up his legs and being absorbed into his skin. He vacuumed the alleyway of its heat in 3 seconds, leaving the air freezing cold. The sludge villain paused, eyes widening. What the? Izuku raised his hand. You're made of liquid. Liquid evaporates when exposed to extreme temperatures. A beam of concentrated white light erupted from Izuku's palm. It wasn't an explosive blast. It was a surgical, terrifyingly intense beam of pure solar heat. It grazed the villain, instantly vaporizing the sludge-binding Bakugo. The villain screamed, releasing the blonde boy as 90% of his fluid body flashed into harmless steam. Izuku caught Bakugo by the collar, dragging him back to safety. Watching from the crowd, a skeletal Tashinori Yagi, All Might, stared in absolute awe. He had been looking for a successor, someone with the heart of a hero. He had found one, but this boy didn't need one for all to be great. This boy was already a titan in the making. The UA entrance exam was a massacre. Izuku didn't just break the point record, he shattered it. His white flames cut through the zero-point armor of the villain bots like a hot knife through butter. When the massive zero-pointer appeared, trapping a brown-haired girl named Uraraka under rubble, Izuku didn't panic. He inhaled, condensing thermal energy into his legs, and unleashed a downward blast of white fire that propelled him into the air like a rocket. He didn't punch the robot. He landed on its head, placed both hands on the cold steel, and unleashed Prominence Wave. The robot glowed cherry red, then white hot, before melting into a useless puddle of slag in under 4 seconds. By the time the quirk apprehension test rolled around on the first day of class, Shota Aizawa already knew he had a monster on his roster. Midoriya, Aizawa drawled, holding up the softball. You scored highest on the practical. Throw this. Use your quirk. Izuku stepped into the circle. He took a breath, letting the white gold flames envelop his right arm. The heat radiating off him was so intense that the rest of Class 1A had to shield their faces. Izuku threw the ball, unleashing a massive pillar of fire behind it for propulsion. Aizawa's capture scarf whipped out, his eyes glowing red. Erasure. The fire vanished. The ball plunked into the dirt at 40 meters. You have immense power, Aizawa lectured, his hair floating. But pure destructive force isn't everything. If you melt every villain and the hostages with them, you're useless. Can you control that heat, or are you just another walking hazard? Izuku didn't look angry. He nodded respectfully. Understood, sensei. Aizawa blinked, deactivating his quirk. Try again. Izuku picked up the ball. He didn't engulf his arm in massive flames this time. He closed his eyes, focusing. The white fire condensed, shrinking down until it was nothing but a tiny, blinding spark at the tip of his index finger. He threw the ball, and at the exact moment it left his hand, he released the compressed thermal spark. Crack. It sounded like a thunderclap. The sudden, extreme expansion of superheated air behind the ball created a localized sonic boom, firing the ball into the stratosphere on a wave of pure atmospheric pressure, rather than raw flame. Aizawa looked at his scanner. Infinity. I use the heat to rapidly expand the air pressure, sensei, Izuku explained politely. No collateral fire damage. Just kinetic force. Aizawa grinned into his scarf. Rational. Smart. Terrifying. From the back of the group, Shoto Todoroki stared at Izuku, his mismatched eyes wide. Shoto knew fire. He despised it. He hated the raging, roaring, consuming crimson flames of his father, but Midoriya's fire wasn't like Endeavor's. It was quiet. It was pure. It was white-hot, yet entirely controlled. For the first time in his life, Shoto felt a pang of something he couldn't quite identify. Was it curiosity? Or was it fear? The Yui Sports Festival arrived, and the world was introduced to Izuku Midoriya. He had breezed through the obstacle course and the cavalry battle, barely breaking a sweat. His control over his thermal output allowed him to fly, create smoke screens by instantly evaporating nearby water, and repel attacks through heat waves. But the true test came in the hallways before the final tournament matches. Izuku was walking toward the arena when a massive, towering figure blocked his path. Flames roared off the man's face and shoulders, casting an imposing crimson glow over the concrete corridor. Enji Todoroki. Endeavor. The number 2 hero. Midoriya Izuku, Endeavor's deep voice rumbled. Izuku stopped, looking up at the towering hero. Endeavor-san. It's an honor. Endeavor's eyes narrowed, scrutinizing the green-haired boy as if inspecting a piece of machinery. I watched your matches. Your quirk is highly unusual. The coloration of your flame suggests a baseline temperature exceeding 3,000 degrees Celsius. Yet you do not sweat. You do not pant. Your movements remain sharp, no matter how much you output. My quirk is called Sunfire, Izuku said, keeping his tone perfectly level. It operates on a different fundamental mechanic than yours, sir. Endeavor took a step forward, the heat radiating from him in an attempt to intimidate the boy. Explain. I am an endothermic reactor, Izuku said simply, refusing to step back. The crimson heat washed over Izuku, but the boy didn't even blink. In fact, a faint white aura flickered to life across Izuku's skin, actively drinking in Endeavor's oppressive heat. My quirk absorbs thermal energy. The hotter my environment, the more fueled I become, and the more fire I produce, the cooler my internal core temperature gets. Silence stretched in the hallway. Endeavor stopped breathing. The flames on his mustache flickered and dimmed in absolute shock. For 20 years, Enji Todoroki had obsessed over his own weakness. His Hellflame was the ultimate destructive force, but it cooked him alive. He had bought a wife, shattered his family, ruined his eldest son, and burdened his youngest son, Shoto, all for the singular goal of creating a child who possessed Hellflame but wouldn't overheat. He had played God with genetics to overcome a biological flaw. And here, standing in front of him, was a middle-class kid from Yuzurifu. A boy born to a woman with weak telekinesis and a father with a parlor-trick fire breath. A cosmic accident of biology. This boy had it. The perfect fire quirk. A fire that fed on heat. A fire that could burn brighter than the sun without ever cooking its user. It was the exact power Endeavor had destroyed his soul to create, freely handed to a random child. A profound, sickening wave of existential dread washed over the number 2 hero. His life's work, his sins, his sacrifices, rendered entirely obsolete by the whims of nature. Shoto has his eyes, Endeavor finally rasped, his voice sounding hollow. He will still surpass you. Todoroki is strong, Izuku agreed mildly. But if you'll excuse me, Endeavor-san. I have a match to win. When Izuku stepped into the arena to face Shoto Todoroki, the tension in the stadium was palpable. Shoto stood across from him, his right side radiating freezing air. I will win this using only my mother's power. I won't use his fire. I refuse. Izuku sighed, his breath coming out as a puff of white steam. Todoroki, I don't know what's going on with your family. I know it's bad. But you're insulting me by holding back. And honestly, your ice isn't going to be enough. We'll see. Shoto yelled, slamming his right foot into the ground. A glacier of massive proportions erupted from the concrete, surging toward Izuku with the force of an avalanche. Izuku didn't dodge. He simply ignited. He didn't unleash a blast. He just allowed his baseline temperature to spike to its maximum resting state. His skin turned blindingly bright, radiating a halo of white gold light that looked like a localized supernova. The glacier hit Izuku and instantly stopped. It didn't shatter, it sublimated. The sheer, overwhelming ambient heat of Izuku's aura bypassed melting entirely, turning the thousands of tons of solid ice directly into superheated steam. A massive cloud of fog blanketed the stadium. The crowd gasped. When the steam cleared, Izuku was standing in the exact same spot, unharmed, his uniform completely dry. A crater of dry concrete surrounded him. Shoto was panting, his right arm covered in frostbite. He shivered violently. Your ice chills your body, Izuku called out, his voice echoing in the quiet stadium. My fire cools mine. We are opposites, Todoroki, but if you don't use your left side, you are going to freeze to death before you ever touch me. Shoto grit his teeth. Shut up. I won't be his tool. You're not his tool. It's your power. Izuku shouted back, stepping forward. Look at me. Look at my fire. Izuku raised his hand, and a towering pillar of brilliant white flames erupted into the sky, so bright the audience had to squint. Endeavor's fire is red. Izuku roared. It's angry. It hurts him. But my fire is mine. And your fire is yours. If you want to beat me, Todoroki, you have to be the one to burn. Something snapped inside Shoto. The memories of his mother crying, the memories of his father's cruelty, they all coalesced into a single point of clarity. Izuku was right. The fire didn't belong to Enji Todoroki. It belonged to Shoto. With a primal scream, Shoto's left side erupted. Crimson flames roared to life, melting the frost on his skin and bathing his side of the arena in blistering heat. Up in the stands, Endeavor stepped up to the railing, gripping it tight enough to dent the metal. Shutu, come on! Izuku grinned, a feral, joyful expression crossing his face. Shoto unleashed a massive wave of Hellflame, a sea of red fire that rushed across the arena. Izuku met it head-on. He thrust both hands forward, unleashing Prominence Wave. A beam of pure white plasma tore through the air. When the red flames met the white, the laws of thermodynamics took over. Hellflame was incredibly hot, reaching temperatures of 2,000 degrees. But Izuku's sunfire was hotter. More importantly, Izuku's quirk immediately began feeding on Shoto's flames. As the two streams of fire clashed in the center of the arena, the red flames didn't push back the white. They were devoured by it. Izuku's white fire turned a blinding, transcendent shade of blue-white as it absorbed Shoto's heat, growing larger, faster, and more intense. What is happening? Present Mike screamed into the microphone, shielding his eyes. Midoriya's flames are eating Todoroki's. Shoto pushed harder, giving everything he had, but it was futile. His fire was a bonfire. Izuku's was a star. The white-gold plasma cut through the crimson sea, splitting it down the middle, and blasted into the ground right at Shoto's feet. The concussive shockwave of thermal expansion hit Shoto like a freight train. He was thrown backward, skidding across the concrete, right past the boundary line, until his back slammed into the stadium wall. The flames died down. The arena was dead silent, save for the hissing of melted rock and superheated air.